First of all, I want you to try to solve this position on your own. It's black to move, and white's pawns are going in this direction, so any pawn push is going to lead to a promotion. Now, I'll tell you right now, this position is forced to checkmate for black, but I'm not going to tell you how many moves it takes. So pause the video and try to solve it, and then let me know in the comments if you got it and how long it took you. Alright, let's get into it. The first thing you've got to notice is that all of white's pieces are stuck behind the pawns. The only pieces white can move are the knight and the king. But the king can't actually move right now because the bishop is blocking the way out. So if you thought of something simple like king to a6, and then after white moves the knight anywhere, bishop to a7, checkmate, I'm sorry, but that's not the answer, because white can play knight to f2. And here, if you take the knight, you're actually giving them a draw, because after the bishop takes the knight, it's stalemate, since white has no moves. And if you don't take the knight, they're just gonna repeat moves. If you move the king, you're not making any progress in the position. You're just moving it back to the starting square. So this idea of king to a6 doesn't actually win the game. Here, you should play bishop to d4, avoiding the lines where the knight blocks and bringing back the idea of playing king to a6 for checkmate. Alright, so now you know what the first correct move is. If you got it wrong the first time and thought it was king to a6, go ahead and pause again, try to solve the position because I'm about to go over the next moves. Here, for example, white plays knight to e5 with the idea that if you come back with king to a6, you won't be able to checkmate because knight to c6 defends the mate and hits the bishop at the same time. No matter where you move the bishop, white always has a check to force your king off to a6 square, which is the square you need for the checkmate. Again, if you take the knight, you're just giving white a draw. So you can't play king to a6 just yet, but now we're going to go into a really beautiful idea. You go bishop takes knight. White's only move here is king to a7. And now remember, a pawn push is going to be a promotion, and that just wins the game because you're promoting with check. So you play bishop to d4 again, forcing the king back to b8. And here, if you play king to a6, now that the knight's gone, you're actually just drawing the position because white won't have any moves left. So here, there's a really cool idea, and that's bishop takes rook on h8, freeing up the a7 square again. The king comes to a7, and you come back with check. And now, in this position, since you took the rook on h8, you can play king to a6. You gave your opponent a queen, so you're not running into stalemate, and now you can play bishop to a7, checkmate. I think this composition is just incredible, and the creativity in the solution is absolutely insane. Now, I want to show you another position, and at the end, I'm going to give you some tips so you always know where to start looking for the right moves in these types of compositions. Alright, let's get into it. In this example, it's black to move, and notice the pawn is one square away from promotion. Pause the video and see if you can find the forced checkmate sequence, because the solution isn't as obvious as you might think. Let's get to the solution, and I hope you figured it out. Now, the first move here is actually a little easier to spot because it's the only move that makes sense, and that's rook to h1. The idea here is to get it out of the way of the pawn so you can promote, and you want to do that with check. After that check, white only has two moves. They either move the king or give up the queen, and since nobody's going to give up the queen for free, it's pretty obvious they got to move the king. And if you thought the next move was to promote the pawn to a queen, I'm sorry to tell you, but you got it wrong. Promoting to a queen in this position actually leads to a draw, because black, even though they're ahead of material, can't stop white from giving perpetual check. White can just keep checking, chasing the black king around in the center, and no matter where you go, white's always going to have a check. And it gets worse, because if at any point you block a check with your queen, white can take the rook. So basically, there's always a way to keep the black king stuck in the center. And if you bring in the queen, they force a rook capture, and that's just the draw. After rook to h1 check, king to g8, the move that wins, and it's not easy to find at all, is this incredible rook sack on h8. So what's the idea behind sacking your rook on h8? Once white takes, you get to promote your pawn to a queen, and now you're setting up a discovered attack. Now let's say white decides to give a check, thinking, I'm going to do the same thing as in the last position, I'm just going to keep giving checks until I force a queen trade and a draw. But if white gives a check without thinking, you've got a forced checkmate sequence because once you move your king, the black king puts the white king in check thanks to the discovered attack, and then white has to either move the king or give up the queen on c6 or c3, but it doesn't matter, there's going to be checkmate on g7. But it's not over. After the promotion, white can still make your life a little harder and try for a draw by playing king to g8. From here, if you haven't found the sequence yet, pause the video again and try to find the forced checkmate. If you calculated all of this from the start and found checkmate in 6, congrats, you're a seriously talented player. So let's get into it. But first, a quick tip. When you're solving compositions like this, the moves leading to checkmate always have to be forcing moves. So what checks do you have in this position? Well, you've got a check on a8, but it can be blocked with check, and that forces a queen trade, so that's no good. You've got a check on g1, which hangs your queen, and you've got a check on a2, which doesn't force a queen trade. So that's the move you want to start with, bringing the king back to the corner. From this position, you're just going to bring your queen closer to get checkmate on e7. So that was a more normal example, meaning it's closer to what could actually happen in a real game. Drop a comment if you managed to solve it, if you found it tough, and how long it took you. And now you might be asking yourself, how can solving chess compositions actually help me improve at the game? Solving chess compositions is one of the most efficient ways to speed up your improvement, and the reason goes way beyond just training tactics. When you sit down with a problem and you gotta find the solution, you're training your brain to recognize patterns, calculate variations, and make decisions under pressure. And those are exactly the same skills you use in a real game. In the book Logical Chess, there's this really interesting point. When you see a master playing simultaneous games, stopping for just a few seconds at each board and making moves with ridiculous ease, it might look like they're calculating everything at the speed of light, but that's not really what's going on. What the master actually has is a massive repertoire of patterns stored in memory. They look at the position and recognize elements they've seen dozens or even hundreds of times before. That instinct for spotting good moves and ruling out bad ones doesn't come from nowhere. It's built through repeated exposure to different positions, and solving compositions is exactly that. Every problem you solve adds a new pattern to your mental database. Over time, you start spotting threats, sacks, and maneuvers almost automatically without having to calculate everything from scratch. And this kind of training also helps with calculation and visualization. Compositions train your ability to calculate variations without moving the pieces, and that's huge. Capablanca insisted that a student should get used to visualizing future positions in their own mind, breaking down the reasoning into logical steps. He used endgames as exercises for exactly that reason, because in a pawn endgame, for example, you gotta count square by square whether your pawn gets to promotion first, and you gotta do that in your head. That ability to see positions that haven't happened on the board yet is what separates the player who just reacts from the player who actually plans ahead. When you solve compositions regularly, that calculation muscle keeps getting stronger and stronger, and candidate moves start showing up way more clearly in your games. Alright guys, that was today's video. Make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video.